All right, everyone. Well, I am talking now with Bri Stensrud. She is the director of Women of Welcome, a project of World Relief and the National Immigration Forum. Bri, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I love it.
Well, you were one of the first people I thought of when I kind of drummed up this whole summit in my mind, because you're so awesome at really listening and seeing both sides of an issue and being in the messy middle so often. So tell us a little bit about yourself and Women of Welcome, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Sure. So I'm Bri Stensrud, and I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I have two kids, and I've been married for 15 years. And I grew up a pastor's kid in the Evangelical Free Church, and so I've just kind of existed in that space for a while. And in the last few years, really just kind of branched out into this world of political homelessness. So here I am.
What does it mean to be politically homeless?
Oh, it means that I don't have a tribe in partisan politics. I think that's the best way to describe it, because people do ask, so what does that mean? How do you vote? I mean, it's always the question. And so it just means that I don't necessarily feel comfortable anywhere, and I'm not exactly sure that I should.
Yeah. Do you feel like that group of people has been growing lately?
I do. But I feel like it's a bit of an undercurrent right now, as opposed to, because the question is, how then do I vote if I'm politically homeless? What is the takeaway? What's the action? And I think that's where some people get stuck.
Yeah, I agree. That can be a really tough one. Today we're talking about faith, politics, and civility, all of those things wrapped into one. I think maybe sometimes the least understood of those is civility. So when you hear those three terms together, what do you think of? And how do you think maybe it's been misunderstood?
Well, I think all three of those things as Christians can and should coexist together. But what comes to my mind first and foremost is accountability, and that there's just been such a lack of accountability on the individual level and on the community level when people are entering into those spaces. And we have really let the partisan narratives really capture our imagination, and also really fill some gaps that I feel like maybe should be the church's role and the Christian community's role instead. And therefore, we haven't been putting people first. And instead of putting people first, we've been putting narratives first, or we've been putting our party first, or we've been putting our own feelings and our own flourishing first. And so civility is absolutely critical to our gospel witness. And so showing up with your faith should inform the conversations that you have, and people shouldn't be able to tell which party you're in, but who you're for. And you should be for people first.
That's such a good point. I think you're right. I think especially today, like, people are leading with politics. They're leading with policy. Like, they're thinking before they're standing next to someone and hearing their story, they're considering, this political side of things, when it really needs to be the other way around. And I always love what Women of Welcome says, which is proximity matters. Tell us about how you guys came up with that. I mean, it's a simple phrase, but it's so powerful.
Well, I think the thing that most excites me about our Women of Welcome community is that Christian women are finding room to breathe, and they're finding confidence in the compassion that they have. And they're being told that there's a space, a very large and big space, that they can have in caring about people who maybe they've been told or they've been taught to fear. And that's what really excites me. And so what people can get closer in proximity by the way they talk about people, they can get closer in physical proximity, they can get closer in their learning. But when you start to take some of those steps forward, and Christian women sometimes feel like they have to be given permission. We've been told that there's a certain space for us for so long. We've been told this is a certain role you can be in. This is a certain thing you can say. This is when you can preach, and this is considered preaching versus teaching. It's all just become very paralyzing for a lot of women. And so Women of Welcome is just this really unique community that says, show up as you are. There's no agenda. And we just want to attach confidence to your compassion. And we're going to do that through a biblical perspective. We're going to pull you out of the partisan politics, and we're going to have you get close to people and care about this issue as a biblical one before you care about it as a political one.
Mm. Yeah. And you guys, I mean, I took a trip to the border with you guys this year, which was absolutely amazing. It was like definitely one of the, if not the highlight of my year, being able to do that. And all of us have stayed in touch, since that trip. And you have people from all sides of the political spectrum on these trips, right? Like you're inviting people that may not agree. I mean, I can tell you that some of us didn't probably agree on some things, but we were all there for one reason. And I think that's unique about what you guys do. Since you started working with Women of Welcome, what have you found encouraging about people you've been able to reach? Maybe people that you didn't, maybe people that weren't engaged on this before, or didn't seem like the kind of person that could be reached.
I think it's surprising for people to show up and realize that it really is just about people. I feel like everything about immigration and immigrants and refugees, which is what Women of Welcome really centers around, has become so polarizing and so political that to get close to it means something to somebody. It could mean that you're for open borders. It could mean that you are now a progressive liberal. It could mean, I mean, there's just so much attached to it. There's so much baggage that to get close means something. And so what's happened is there has been a real gap of curiosity about people who are trapped in the very systemic things that we keep saying, so the echo chambers that we've been living in, people, the narratives that we have attached to certain issues and things. There are very real people that are really kind of trapped and scapegoated in a lot of those narratives. And so when you get close, the outside world, who has not remained curious, and who has really decided this is a political issue instead of a biblical one, will tell you certain things about getting close. And I think the wonderful thing about Women of Welcome is, as we've said, once you get close, you'll understand that this has nothing to do with partisan politics. It has a lot to do with public policy, like that there's an aspect of that, but we want to show up as Christians first. And the way in which we show up and we understand this through our biblical values and our interpretation of the scriptures is going to inform everything else. And so it is this kind of people first mentality. And you do realize, I mean, they're people just like you and I. We have a lot in common, and there's more in common than what divides us.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that we've been talking about with multiple people is the divide within the church, which obviously applies to this issue and many other issues. It has really gotten pretty bad in the past few years in terms of Christian disunity. Like it's a struggle sometimes, like worse than it's ever been. What are your thoughts on managing the division? Like, what are we supposed to do right now? And I know you don't have all the answers, Bri, but like, I'd be curious to get your thoughts.
I think it goes back to this people first mentality, because right now, a lot of these social issues have been co-opted, have been taken by partisan platforms, and everything is just so heated and so divisive. And I do think that there are a great number of people in this country that are tired of hating each other. They're just sick of always having to be angry about something. And I do think that the church has really been like, all right, we're just not going to handle any of the divisive issues and whatnot. And so my advice to us who want to find unity would be to take the partisan narrative out of it. And we take it out of our pews, we take it out of our pulpits, and that comes, with accountability, right? It's individual accountability and it's community accountability. But people are like, well, how do you do that? How do you practically take partisan narratives out of the conversation? And what I would say is people first. So if you are talking about someone, if you're going to teach about someone, do you know someone in that situation? And it's not just, do you know someone? Do you have relationship with someone? How close in proximity are you to be able to talk about those things? The Bible is not political. Jesus did not show up in a partisan way. And so we can show up and we can teach and disciple our congregations and our friends in the same way. It's, let's talk about people first. What does it really mean to be a neighbor? What does it mean to be for the flourishing of others, and not just for our own flourishing and our own communities flourishing? So I do think when we think about people first, that allows us to be curious enough to not attach some of these partisan narratives. And it also makes us ask questions about the things that maybe we continue to hear, or the things that maybe we've been taught to continually say.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good.
Yeah.
When it comes to civility, which we kind of already talked about, where do you see people kind of doing this, like misunderstanding what it is and maybe not doing it correctly, or going wrong, even in their attempts to actually practice it?
Well, I think most of us have bought into this idea that compassion means compromise, and that we can't be full of conviction and full of compassion at the same time. And I think what that does is it puts us on the defensive, and it makes us feel like any conversation we enter into, we have to win something, and we have to leave being right. We have to have the last word, the last say. And so when I read about Jesus's ministry and his life, he is first showing up with compassion. And that doesn't mean he's soft or too tender. That doesn't mean he doesn't have his moments where he has this righteous anger and whatnot. It just means that he is self-controlled. He's exhibiting the fruits of the Spirit, and he knows that the person that he's talking with, he made, and he deeply loves. And so I do think that we've lost this ability to see people first, and we think, okay, I'm going to listen as far as I need to in order to understand how to win this argument or win this person over. And I don't actually think that's really being civil. I mean, you can be really smart and have all the right answers, but not be civil. And I don't think that compassion is a weakness, and I don't think that it means that you compromise on your convictions either.
Yeah, compassion is not a weakness. Like, I feel like one of the terms I remember hearing growing up was like bleeding heart, and it was always like a negative thing, but it's like not necessarily, it's a good thing to be able to see, to be empathetic, even if you don't agree with necessarily the policy solution that, others do. Like, it's so good to see people first and to be compassionate first, because, that's seeing the humanity in people. And that's like number one. That has to be number one, because that's how we see, that we are made in God's image, every single person. And so that's really, really important.
And I have an example of this.
Sure.
And so this is a practical example. So I remember when I was in Washington, D.C., and I was talking with a group of immigrant advocates, and they'd kind of been in the space for a really long time. And I was really kind of new and green to being really in deep depth detail and work in the movement. And I remember just talking to this group who was like a big group of potential donors and whatnot. And I was telling them about how I knew my evangelical community of women, once they could see what I saw, once they could get close enough to really understand that there was so much more that they had in common with some of these people that were coming across the border or to the border. And I was being very sincere and heartfelt in the fact that I believe in the love of my Christian community, and that they love God and that they love people. And I said, and we are a pro-life people, and that means that we care about the dignity and sanctity of every human life. This doesn't necessarily feel like it fits in my pro-life community just yet, but it's a puzzle piece that I'm dedicated to helping connect. And the room was kind of silent, and I was, a little stunned, like, all right, where's this going to go? And I had a woman, very sweet woman, sincere woman. She leaned forward she said, I have a question. And I said, okay, well, does anyone have a question? She said, I have a comment. And she said, I just want you to know, I'm not going to give up my convictions on abortion. And I was like, were we talking about that? Like, I was like, I was a little bit in shock. I said, give up your views on abortion? And she's like, yeah, I'm not doing that. And I said, I guess I wasn't assuming that you would. And she said, Well, I don't know any evangelical Christian women like that. I don't know anyone. You're telling me that evangelical women would work with me on immigration, even though I don't believe the same things about them as abortion? I don't know anyone like that. I said, yeah, you do.
Yeah.
And she started to cry. And it just was such a humbling moment, because what I had realized is that this woman did not feel safe being in a relationship with a Christian. She did not feel seen. And she thought, because I mentioned that I was pro-life and that I cared about immigration, there was common ground there, but she felt like we were at an impasse because I was pro-life and she was pro-choice, but we both cared about the humanity and the humane treatment of immigrants and refugees in this country. And it was just this really stunning moment in the room where it was like, there is so much more. And I see you, and I'm not here. I don't have an agenda. I'm here to just work with who wants to work together. And that means you could believe a lot of different things in me, and you likely will. And that's okay, because we could make progress for this certain vulnerable population together. And then in other areas, we're probably maybe not going to work together, but we could do some real good over here together. You know? And you don't see a lot of that. A lot of that gets really lost because we're not in relationship. And Christians haven't been showing up in a way that invites somebody into a conversation. And I think that has been a huge miss.
Okay, how do we show up that way?
Yeah. It's a discipline. It's a discipline. First and foremost, and I think people say this a lot, and it becomes kind of like this fad phase, and that is talking about people as made in the image of God. Like, everybody is an image bearer. And what that means is first and foremost, if we're thinking about that people that we're sitting across from, people that we're talking to, are deeply loved and have immeasurable value. And that should shape the way that I interact with somebody. So if I know that that person is deeply loved and they're made by God and they're loved by God just as much as me, no matter what they think or believe, that should shape the way that I show up for them. Second of all, I think a lot of these conversations that we have about any given topic that are really hot and heated, they're rarely, if ever, about me. They're rarely, if ever, about you. So the issue could be deeply personal, and it's likely that you care, incredibly deeply about it. Otherwise, you're probably not speaking up for it unless you're caring so deeply about it. But taking myself out, this is the discipline that I have to do. Taking myself out whenever possible out of that center of the conversation is helpful, because it makes me choose to not be offended. It allows space for me to not be easily offended. And so many of the conversations that I have, I'm actively choosing to not be personally offended. So when somebody is saying something and I'm like, that is so wrong, or if they're saying something, I'm like, man, that person is lost. I just, you know what? It's not about me, and it's not about necessarily what's wrong in the conversation. It's about, the next thing for me is, it's about being curious. Why is this person saying what they're saying? Why are they saying it like they're saying it? And what is compelling them to be so incredibly passionate about it towards me?
Yeah.
I think when I see someone as an image bearer first, and I'm putting on that kingdom mindset of their value, and then I am choosing to not be easily offended and make it personal. And then I'm also choosing to stay curious, and so that I will listen well. So the goal of my conversation is not to win anything. And I think we've talked about this a lot just in Christian circles, just about how, no one wins anything by winning an argument. You see very few people are like, oh yeah, now I'm just going to go be pro-life, or now I'm just going to go all in over here. It's really kind of the slow work of listening well. And you're not about winning. As Christians, we want to be planting seeds, not throwing punches. And I think that can be a lot of what we feel like, and because we're feeling like we need to defend something. And I think we have to take a step back from feeling like we're defending something. We have a God that's really big, and we have a God who did not come down to earth in human form for political takeover. And even though his disciples thought that that was the way that they were going to win, was by taking over the Roman Empire. That's not how Jesus was going to do this. He was going to get close to people, and he was going to be moved to compassion when he engaged with them. So I think when you show up to not have an agenda at the end of, those are kind of my big things when I sit down with someone, where I'm like, all right, take a deep breath. This is an image bearer. This is not about me. I don't need to get personally offended. I'm going to be curious enough to really listen to not just what she's saying, but how she's saying it, why she's saying it. What about me makes her say it that way? Is she feeling like she has a point to prove to me? And so at the end of all of that, that means my goal is not to win an argument. It's really just to not leave someone where they are. I want them to be just as curious about me and my position that I am about theirs.
Yeah. And you've probably, because I see, what you put out there, and I'm sure you're getting some criticism from both sides of the aisle on this stuff sometimes. How do you manage that, like, mentally? Like, do you have something that you're doing to, like, sort of foster peace within yourself, in order to do this every day? Because this is your job, basically. And it's also who you are. So how do you stay strong?
I think, again, it goes back to either I believe what I say or I don't. And so, Christians, we say we have these values. We say that there are things that are important to us and that we prioritize. And yet we don't always live those things out. And I do this very imperfectly myself. So I'm not like this shining beacon of whatever. It's just, I have come to realize that putting these things into practice is a choice. It's a discipline, just like it's a choice to get close to people, or, in closer proximity. In my space, immigrants and refugees, that is a choice. I don't have a lot of either undocumented or asylum seeking families in and around just like my neighborhood. It's a choice that I have to do to get close. And so it's a choice that it's a discipline I'm still trying to perfect, probably never will, of just realizing it's not about me. And I want to be curious enough that that person thinks that I'm for them. And it's okay that they're not for me. I get that. I have a community that cares about me and that I'm invested in. And I think that's probably a big reason why I don't wallow in some of the hard that comes into my inbox, because I have a community and I'm confident in what God has called me to do. I'm not supposed to be winning arguments. I'm not supposed to be throwing punches. I'm supposed to be planting seeds. And because I feel freed up from having an agenda, specifically a politically partisan one, I feel a lot of space to breathe about it. I don't feel pressure. I know what the Bible says about what I'm talking about. I know where the church should be on this, and I can be confident about that. I have a confident compassion towards people, and that only comes from the Lord. And
confident compassion. I love that so much.
Yeah, it's a discipline. It's not something you can just be like, I'm going to be strong. No, you can't really.
Yeah.
You put those we just talked about into practice, and you keep having to do it over and over and over again. It just becomes a very freeing thing.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Well, thank you, Bri, so much. Now tell us, you recently had a children's book come out. So tell us about that, where we can find it, and how people can connect with Women of Welcome.
Thanks. So Dan Darling and I, who I think is also kind of on this event, he and I wrote a children's book together called The Biggest Best Light. I don't even think I have a copy down here with me, but we wrote The Biggest Best Light, and it's a children's book for elementary age kids. And it's really about seeing people as God does. And what we really try and showcase in that book is a whole life, pro-life ethic in the illustrations, just about how a lot of our rhetoric, our narrative, just the sin of our own hearts has really put people into shadows. And we have chosen not to see people as God does. And so what we need the light of Jesus in our hearts to be able to shine into all those places that we have put people, and so that we can see them as God sees them. And so there is hope in the world because Jesus is the light of the world, and he can break through all the shadows. So that's what that book is about.
and get it because I have it. It's really good. And man, we need good children's books. And that's one of them. So everybody buy a copy for your kids or grandkids.
Oh, thank you. So you can find that on Amazon, or I guess anywhere books are found. So that's the biggest, best light. And Women of Welcome. Women of Welcome exists mostly online. So you can find us on Instagram or on Facebook. Womenofwelcome.com is our website. But that is a community for Christian women who are looking to understand more about immigrants and refugees from a biblical perspective. We are following our compassion into that space. And that is a space that is strictly and very specifically nonpartisan. And we want to look at immigrants and refugees as image bearers, as they surely are. And that means we do a lot of Bible studies. That means we do a lot of community forum conversations and talks. That means sometimes we go in closer proximity to the border and we take some of those trips. So you can find us online there.
All right. Thank you so much, Bri.
All right. Have a good one.